One of the first recorded lumberyard transactions dates back to 1200 BC. A Phoenician prince had a well-stocked yard on the Mediterranean shore in what is now Lebanon.
These were the famous cedars of Lebanon, huge trees that were equivalent to anything you would find in the Pacific Northwest. And these trees went to build the ships of Egypt, the ships of Phoenicia, and the ships of Israel. Any power in that part of the world required a Phoenicia for their ships.
And because dominance at sea contributed to a kingdom's strength and security, whoever ran a lumberyard wielded power as well. Around 1000 BC, a large quantity of lumber was brokered in connection with one of the most famous temples in history.
A Phoenician prince named Cyrus, who had a lumberyard on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. And from there, he provided King Solomon with gigantic quantities of cedar that was used to frame the temple built in Jerusalem.
The lumber trade expanded exponentially in 12th and 13th century Europe, especially in Germany, England, and Italy, when cities began to grow.
Unlike in ancient times, when they built these cities with brick and mortar or with stone, these new city-states were built with large quantities of lumber.
Lumberyards appeared in major port cities because that's where the shipyards were. The Venice Arsenal, a naval depot, held what was perhaps Europe's biggest lumberyard.
The arsenal was heavily guarded because if they lost their timber supply, they lost their power.
When Europeans came to the American Northeast, their first major industries were shipbuilding and sawmills, which provided the necessary pine lumber.
In some cases, the sawmills had lumber yards adjacent to them, but they also ended up setting up separate lumber yards because of the popularity and the need for lumber.
America's westward expansion brought further growth to the lumber trade. First, the settlers built their homes by cutting trees themselves.
As these initial settled areas were cut over, and as towns began to develop, then there was a need for shipping in lumber for more distant points, and then there was a demand for a central type of location where lumber could be purchased by local homeowners and contractors and businesses.
When the railroad arrived in 1861, Chicago benefited from its central location as well as its proximity via the Chicago River to the lumber stands of the Great Lakes region. It became the lumberyard capital of the Midwest, with an extensive lumber district.
The railroad had a big impact on the spread of lumber yards because every town that was a stop on the railroad would have a yard because the lumber would be shipped in, would sit in that yard, and then be distributed out to the residents of the little towns as they built up.
The mid-19th century saw a major technological change in the lumberyard. The bandsaw helped lumberyards expand from being mere warehouses to businesses that could cut wood to order. Around that same time, the gold rush lured people to the West Coast and San Francisco.
There was a tremendous explosion in the growth of the city, homes needing to be built and businesses and so on. And shipbuilding was one of the first industries that was taken on when gold was discovered. So lumber yards became an intrinsic part of the skyline of early San Francisco.
Lumber came from California, the Pacific Northwest, and even as far away as New England. The Northeast also supplied many lumberyard entrepreneurs, men with lumber backgrounds who'd come west to seize a new opportunity.
These folks quickly realized that there was a limited amount of money that could be made in the gold fields, but there was almost an unlimited amount that could be made in the lumber industry.
As a result, the San Francisco Bay Area became the lumberyard capital of the West. Lumber dealers flourished with San Francisco's boom and tragedies. Remarkably, from 1849 to 1851, San Francisco suffered 6 devastating fires. Then in 1906, it was struck by a massive earthquake and subsequent fire. The Bay Area's busy lumberyards slowed down during wartime and the Depression. But after World War II, lumber was again in great demand in San Francisco and across America. returning GIs could easily qualify for home loans, and the construction business grew spectacularly. Today, with a nationwide building boom, lumber yards continue to flourish. But in addition to traditional lumber, the yards now provide products that have revolutionized the construction industry: engineered woods. U.S. lumber manufacturers shipped nearly 39 billion board feet of softwood lumber in 2004. That's enough to build a bridge more than 30 feet wide from Earth to the moon. The lumberyard will return on Modern Marvels